All right. Hello, everybody. Today, Kate and I will be presenting on an article we found titled Musical Training in the Development of Empathy and Prosocial Behaviors. So at the outset, this article looks at the existing literature on the topic and kind of divides the article into three main portions. The first portion is musical training boosts empathy and prosocial behavior. So in this section, the authors looked at different findings that support this relationship. The second portion is the psychological mechanisms of the effect of musical training and the development of empathy. So they kind of build on the first section and look at what actual psychological mechanisms may be the cause of the observed relationship. And then the third section kind of goes into the neural basis of these relationships, looking at brain structure and functional changes associated with musical training that aid in the development of the empathic brain. So to start, what is empathy? In the article, empathy is divided into three main categories. The first, affective, which is feeling others' emotions. The second, cognitive, taking others' perspectives. And the third, motivational, desiring to promote others' well-being or alleviate their suffering. So when we are told to see something through someone else's eyes or to walk in someone else's shoes, that's kind of the affective and cognitive aspect of empathy. And then the caring aspect of empathy, which is so important, is really that motivational aspect. And then at the bottom there, you see a diagram which kind of outlines some related variables as well as empathy that lead to prosocial behavior. So as you can see, it kind of originates with age. At the top, we have emotional expressiveness. In the middle, we have insight and role taking. Those kind of play off of each other. And all of this leads to empathy, which ultimately leads to prosocial behaviors.
So we want to talk about why empathy is important. I think it's kind of obvious why we want people to be empathetic, but to highlight some of the most important aspects, it's crucial for social well-being. So prosocial behavior is necessary to act in a group. High levels of empathy are correlated with a decrease in violent behavior. And numerous studies have found that a level of empathy is a protective factor against development of violent behaviors. Deliberate regulation of empathy is essential for the development of prosocial behavior. And though empathy develops early in life, it is flexible. So the earlier that one is able to start developing empathy, the better, but it is subject to change. The article talks about musical training as a behavioral intervention. A key aspect of this is the theory of mind, which develops in children at a young age. And we have a video that kind of demonstrates this.
I don't know, you have to find it. Okay. Kindergarten is a really exciting time. One of the developmental hallmarks at this age is that children develop this awareness that other people have different thoughts and feelings than they do. This is called theory of mind.
Because he thought it was.
He thought it was, that's right. The first test we did was this representational change booklet, which shows different animals. What's this?
A bird.
A bird, what color is it?
Blue.
A blue bird, that's right. What do you see through this window?
A dinosaur.
And it is a
Dinosaur.
dinosaur. And then what do you see through this window here?
A lion.
A lion. Can you turn the page for me? And it is a
Lion. Sun.
a sun. What did you think it was before I showed you?
A lion.
A lion. What do you think Millie will think it is before she sees it?
A lion.
What do you see there?
Lion.
And it's a
Sun.
oh my gosh. What's inside?
Smarties.
Okay, can you open it up for me? There's a little bit of tape there. With each child, we showed them this box of Smarties and asked what was inside. When they went to open the box, instead of Smarties, they found raisins. What did you think? When I did the task with PubMed, he really had this understanding that his sister wouldn't know that he knew there were raisins inside the Smarties box. What do you think she'll think is inside? In the third and fourth tests, we set up a few different storylines. And at the end of these storylines, we asked the children a few different questions to find out whether they really understood the perspective and thinking of the two different dolls in the stories. They want to put the ball away. So they put the ball in the box. Can you open the box for me? Can you close it? Joey decides to go outside. And then May takes the ball and she puts it in the basket. And then Joey comes back inside. And where do you think he'll look for the ball?
In here.
In there. Why will he look in there?
Because that's where I put the ball.
And where is it really? That's right.
Okay, so that video kind of demonstrates the theory of mind. One common example that people learn is this idea of children playing hide and seek and them thinking that because they can't see you, you can't see them, even if they're in plain sight. And this kind of translates to empathy because it's being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes or take someone else's perspective. So perceived and induced empathy, perceived and induced emotion of music is moderated by empathy. So this kind of demonstrates the connection of empathy and how that relates to music. More specifically, studies have shown that age of that musical training begins is important. So very early on, cognitive empathy is higher in very early starters. Another interesting study found that the motivation for starting musical training also was a factor in how that translated into the development of empathy. So what are the underlying psychological mechanisms? Collaboration, shared affective experiences, imitation, and synchronizing are all processes that are involved in both the development of empathy and musical play. So imitation, synchronizing, this is all essential for this development of understanding someone else's emotion and is also key to playing, especially as in children. Joint music making promotes pro-social behavior in 4-year-old children. The study found, and the setup of the study involved kids who were either in a condition, a musical condition or a non-musical condition. And the children in the musical condition were given wood frogs that could be played as instruments. And they followed a leader who showed them how to play, and they all played together. And in the non-musical condition, children were given wood frogs that had no intention to be used as musical instruments. And the findings of this study found that children who in the musical condition who were forced to imitate and synchronize, collaborate, and had shared experiences were more likely to engage in helping behaviors later on. So music has a strong connection to emotion. I think we all know that. People can be brought to tears from music, and feeling, expressing, and perceiving emotion are all essential. Music provides children with a rich emotional experience, a foundation for emotion recognition and experience sharing. So not only is a child experiencing emotion for themselves, they're also seeing how something that affects them also affects someone else differently or possibly in the same way. Musical training establishes sensory and motor skills, specifically learning to play an instrument. So piano, for instance, requires fine motor skills in the hands, as does other instruments. This creates a basis for neurocognitive abilities needed to mimic the movements and emotions for others. And this kind of comes down to the mirror neuron system, which is the basic basis for our capacity for empathy. So this is the idea that there are neurons in my brain that when I watch Ari do something, the same neurons that would be activated when I'm doing the same thing are activated as I watch him. So sensory motor processes related to observation and action execution play into this mirror neuron system, and children with musical training are more likely to imitate others' motions. I also want to highlight the social aspect of music. I think this is especially relevant for children. Creating music facilitates social interaction. And then it's important to recognize that there is a difference between active music activity, so playing music, whether in a technical or formal context or just with something like this in this image with children playing a drum together, versus passive music activity, which is listening to music. Music promotes synchrony, which is key for promoting sociability. And it creates cooperative networks.
All right, so building off of what Kate just talked about, the article goes into detail on the brain structural and functional changes which are associated with musical training. So there is actually a neural basis for this relationship. And it is thought that the brain systems that are involved with musical training kind of piggybacked on the neural systems that evolved to help us share others' feelings and navigate our social world. So that is one link to the development of empathy and music. And one of the distinct features of musical training is this structural change in brain regions. And these brain regions include the auditory and sensory motor areas, which are primarily engaged in music training, as well as some regions that aren't primarily engaged in musical training, such as the inferior frontal regions, the multimodal integration regions, and the corpus callosum. And across the board, the differences that have been observed in brain structure are more evident in those that start musical training at an early age, as well as musicians who practice more intensively. So the degree to which the brain actually changes kind of depends on some other variables. Can you go back one slide, Kate? So there's one of the studies that was highlighted in the paper, kind of centered around the corpus callosum. And it was a group of 6 to 7-year-olds that had no previous differences in brain structure. They were divided into 2 groups. Group 1 received 15 months of musical training. Group 2 received no training. And at the end of the study, they looked at individuals' brains and they noticed that for the group that received musical training, there was an increased gray matter density in the primary auditory and motor areas, as well as an increased volume of the corpus callosum. And in the second group, which received no training, these differences were not observed. So this is one example of a macrostructural change. And macrostructural changes can kind of be characterized by the physical structure of the brain. So as we see here, there's increased gray matter density as well as increased volume. However, there are also microstructural changes which are associated with musical training. One of these microstructural changes, which was highlighted in the paper, has to do with the insular cortex. So they found that musical training alters functional connectivity between brain regions involved in music perception and production. And specifically, they found that there is an increased insular functional connectivity in musicians. So what this means is the different brain regions, in this case, the insular cortex, and the way that the insular cortex functions, especially between brain regions, was heightened for musicians. And this is crucial in terms of empathy because the insula plays a large part in processing subjective feelings and emotions. Finally, the paper ended with some implications and further directions. So just to recap, musical training is positively associated with empathy and prosocial behavior, and negatively correlated with behaviors such as violent acts and other behavioral problems. And then one of the directions that they highlighted was the use of music as a therapeutic tool. One aspect of this could be for children with empathy deficits, such as autism spectrum conditions. So this may encourage children to participate in social interactions when they might not normally participate in these interactions, as well as individuals with autism spectrum conditions have been shown to decrease the severity of psychiatric conditions with the addition of consistent musical activity. And then additionally, I think it's important to highlight that music can be used as a tool for emotional development and emotional education as well. And importantly, music has the ability to create emotion in people without them having to actually become that emotion. So one example, which is highlighted often, is you can listen to a song and you might feel the emotion of sadness, but you actually won't become sad yourself. So this makes the learning process in terms of emotional development much smoother. And finally, in order to solidify the relationships that were identified in the paper, further research must include longitudinal studies to establish a causal link. Thank you.
Thank you.